Caroline, towards the end of your play, Branwell says about his sisters, "Would you all pull your claws out of me?" Did Branwell, to some extent, feel that the world was against him?
Yes, I think certainly towards the end. At the beginning, he was very well supported and encouraged in all his efforts by his family. But when things started to go wrong for him, of course, that meant it hit him doubly hard. And as is suggested, that he may have been addicted to opiates. I think there's an inherent paranoia that comes with that drug addiction that would exacerbate any feelings of being judged. I think Charlotte especially was very disappointed in what had become of him, because he was her collaborator from a young age, and to see the awful things happening to him and his inability to cope with them must have really sort of left her feeling disenchanted. And I think he very much felt that she was watching and judging him, as were the rest of his family. And being the only boy in the family, it was his duty to be the breadwinner and to help support his sisters were they to remain unmarried after their father died. And his feeling that he was failing in all of that probably added to his thoughts that he was being judged and he wasn't being the brother that he should be or the son that he should be. So absolutely, I think he felt that everything was against him by the end.
And possibly he was a harsh judge of himself by that time. By
that time, absolutely. I think a lot of the vanity and a lot of the self-importance that he suffered from in his earlier years had dissipated by then, certainly.
He says also, "I am not suited to this kind of life." What did you mean by that?
Well, it very much leads on from that, really. I see Bramwell as a type of person who is an artist first and foremost. However, whatever his level of skill, first and foremost, he is creative. He's not a breadwinner, he's not a businessman, and he was never meant to be. It just wasn't how his mind worked. And one of the reasons that I wrote the play was to further the idea that anyone can be anything. You know, a man can be less of a businessman and more of an artist, and a woman can be more business oriented, more practical than a man, and indeed his love interest in his Lydia is much more practical than Branwell is. And I think that one of the things that caused his decline was the fact that so much pressure was on him and not enough was on his sisters, and they would have, especially Anne, who was very sort of industrious, would have thrived having had more ownership of her own life and more ability to earn her own money. But because the pressure was on Branwell, everything fell apart.
Do you think he might have been more successful in today's society?
Certainly, yes, I think so. I think that addiction is better understood, alcohol addiction and possibly drug addiction, if that was what he was suffering from. So he would have potentially been supported and given better help than he was. But also attitudes towards men and women have changed. They need to change still further, I believe, but they have changed. And so the women would have been able to make their own money as something other than governesses. They would have been able to pursue any career they wanted. They may not have ended up being writers because the world would be so open to them. But so in a way it's beneficial that they did live when they did, because of course then we wouldn't have had the wonderful works they created. But Branwell as well would have had an opportunity to pursue things without the added pressure of his family's expectations.
He goes on to say, "I make mistakes," and to me that in a sense sums up much of what your play is about, much of the territory of the Dissolution of Percy, and is also something that could almost have been Branwell's epitaph.
Yes, absolutely. No, I agree with that. And I think that it's a big step for him to admit that. As a character, I think he was always trying to make himself look like he was going somewhere, feel like he was going somewhere. And it's that kind of admission that shows that he really is in the latter stages of his decline, that he's accepted that things aren't really going to go very well from here on.
And Emily goes on to say, "But all the world makes mistakes, Banny. You have that misfortune. do you think that she sounds sympathetic, that she's trying to reassure him that everybody makes mistakes, or does it kind of minimise the individuality of his problems?
I think she is a little embittered in this line, because she goes on to say, do you have that misfortune that yours have consequences? And that suggests that she is, in this situation, she's getting very tired of him. He's come home drunk, and as much as she loves him and wants to help him, she is getting frustrated with this happening all the time. And so I think she is kind of belittling his problems, and I think she's doing it in a way that she wants to help him and see that they are surmountable. He can get through this stage, but the fact that she says yours, but you have that misfortune that yours have consequences, suggests that she feels she and her sisters do nothing of consequence, whether it's positive or negative. And Bramwell is blessed in her eyes that he has that capability of making a difference, and he's throwing it away. So, you know, she's saying, yes, I make mistakes, Charlotte makes mistakes, Anne makes mistakes, but in the grand scheme of things, because we're women, ours don't matter. So in a way, it's not particularly calculated to comfort him, but I think Emily was very much of the kind who gave tough love, and Branwell sadly didn't respond to that very well, at least in this stage of his life.
Now that we're starting to rediscover some of Branwell's work, and there's a chance that his character and his work might be reappraised, what do you think Branwell Bronte's legacy is, and what do you think it could be?
I think that there's a very sort of social legacy with Bramwell, in that it almost serves as a warning story about how if men and women are too easily differentiated and placed into particular pigeonholes, it will have a negative effect on both genders, both sexes, because the women in the tale, and of course based on characters in real life, they had no real responsibilities. They did work as hard as they could to make the money to support Patrick, and also, to be fair, to take some of the pressure off Branwell, but they didn't have many options. They were stuck being governesses, and Branwell struggled trying to do jobs he wasn't suited to. And so I think that we can look at his story and think of how we can serve people like him better, and serve people like his sisters better, sort of socially. But also, I think that just by existing and being the character he was, he inspired a lot of the work of his sisters. I wouldn't say that he was responsible for the work of any of his sisters, but I would say that characters' lines such as Heathcliff's line about love and the balances of love, and how he could love more in a day than this other character could in 50 years, I believe it is. That line may not have existed without him, but also characters such as Lord Loughborough. I don't believe that the main antagonist in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was based on him, as many people say, but I believe that Lord Loughborough is. I think that a lot of situations would not have happened in the books without Branwell, especially events happening in sort of public houses, more of the sort of the conversations that they have would lack that element.
Like the curates in Shirley, for example.
Yes, like the curates in Shirley, absolutely. I think that that level of understanding, while the girls saw a lot of life, more than people think, because of the poor coming in and eating at the parsonage, being fed, visiting the town, they would have seen more than people thought, and they're travelling as well. But I think Branwell added the element of being really in the midst of it, in the midst of this real sort of fug of social activity. And we can thank him for that, absolutely.
Branwell made mistakes, but the world also made mistakes in its placing of men and women and different people in round pegs in square holes.
Absolutely, I think that's quite right, and poor Branwell was a sufferer of that, because he was such an extreme character. He had his traits to such an extreme that he couldn't undo them. He couldn't change who he was to any degree. He was absolutely unbending in who he was, and however hard he tried, he couldn't conform to what people wanted him to conform to.